Let's get more on this with Ashley Townshend. He is Director of Foreign Policy and Defence at the United States Studies Centre, joining us from Sydney this morning. Ashley, thanks for your time. As you look back and reflect on the impact of 9/11, how do you think this event and the following 2 decades of war actually impacted US foreign and defence policy in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, it's very clear looking back that the decision to go not just to war in Afghanistan, but to launch a series of wars that have taken 20 years to begin to wrap up was a strategic error by the United States. More than anything else, the Middle East has been a distraction from the main game of strategic competition between the United States and China, which really Washington was on the verge of beginning to invest in substantial ways just before the 9/11 attacks in New York City and in Washington, D.C. Of course, the US had to react in Afghanistan, and of course, there was an important initial mission and objective in the early years of the Afghan war. But the 20 years that have ensued have sapped American resources. We heard in the lead there that the cost estimated by Brown University is in the vicinity of $8 trillion of spending, resources that are now much needed or ought to have been much better spent, focused here in the Indo-Pacific on building a US influence and preparing the United States military, the United States and its allies and partners for what will now be a very long and sustained and more difficult than it needed to be strategic competition with China.
Ashley, over President Obama's 2 terms, he certainly came under significant pressure for missing the rise of China, and it took President Trump to ultimately hit the reset button on that relationship. Now that's being carried through by President Biden. Is the United States going to be able to reverse course on this strategic distraction, as you called it?
Well, Biden made the right decision in getting out of Afghanistan, and more broadly through the Global Posture Review, which is currently being undertaken by the Pentagon, in realigning US global military presence to focus less on counterinsurgency wars in the Middle East and much more on great power competition, to a certain extent with Russia in Europe and much more so with China in the Indo-Pacific. This was the same decision that the Trump administration reached, and it's fair to say as well that it was also the intention of the Obama administration. It was, after all, the Obama administration and Secretary Hillary Clinton at the time that announced, in Australia no less, the US pivot to Asia 10 years ago, and the desire of that administration of the day to focus diplomatic, economic, military resources of the United States on this part of the world. That would have been the right decision, but as you say, the US got mugged by reality in the Middle East, and of course, most importantly, it was unable at the time, for domestic political reasons, for reasons of the Obama administration, to weather the short-term costs of pulling out of the Middle East for the long-term gains of investing in the Indo-Pacific. That 10 years of lost time alone since Obama announced a pivot to Asia, which was never delivered, has cost the United States trillions of dollars more. It has worn out US high-end military assets like B-1 bombers and F-22 strike fighters. It has sucked up the capacity of US surface fleet of carrier strike groups. And perhaps most importantly of all, it has also distracted America's allies and partners like Australia, the Republic of Korea, Japan, and others that should have been more focused on posturing their militaries and aligning their own foreign policies to deal with the challenge that China presents in this region, but instead were also distracted through alliance management with Washington on the teacup wars of the Middle East. So the price tag in strategic terms, when you look back at this in the future, will be really quite astronomical.